Okay, so you're here because you want a deep dive, and today we are diving headfirst into some freshly released JFK files.
Yeah.
I mean, you want to get right to the big picture of really significant events, right? Without drowning in a sea of details.
Yeah.
So just consider this your express lane to the key takeaways here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it is a lot.
Yeah.
We're looking at a ton of material here. The JFK assassination records were already massive. Like we're talking over 6 million pages total. And then just yesterday, March 18th, 2025, there was this huge new drop of material.
Wow.
Over 63,000 pages.
Yeah.
Something like 2,200 files. So, I mean, a lot to go through. And what's really key for you guys listening is that this includes newly discovered FBI files, about 2,400 of them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and these are only identified last month.
That's crazy. Okay, so we're laser focused here.
Right.
Our mission is to cut through this latest release,
Okay.
to figure out what it reveals, and I guess maybe what it still hides about President Kennedy's assassination and all of the questions that people still have about it. We're digging for the real insights here, folks.
Yeah, absolutely. Those little nuggets, those aha moments that make you think about things a little differently.
Okay, so to really make sense of all of this, we need to set the stage here.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, as you know, President Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas in November of 1963. And then the Warren Commission wrapped up its investigation in 1964 and concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone.
Yeah.
And of course, a lot of people have always doubted that conclusion.
Of course.
Which leads us to the question of how these massive archives even saw the light of day.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So it's really thanks to the President John F. Kennedy Assassination Records Collection Act of 1992.
Oh.
So this law was passed, and basically it mandated that all government records related to the assassination be collected and eventually released publicly.
So this has been a long time coming, though.
Right. The original target date for full disclosure was back in October 2017.
Wow. Okay, so what is actually in these millions of pages? Like, what kind of information are we even talking about here?
Yeah. So it's a real mix. You know, there's a bit of everything. You have these investigative reports from the Warren Commission itself, obviously,
Right.
but also reports from the FBI and the CIA.
Okay.
And these reports cover everything. I mean, everything from Oswald's background to that intriguing trip he took to Mexico City right before the assassination, and a step-by-step account of what happened in Dallas that day.
Yeah, that Mexico City trip always felt like a loose end, didn't it? Like, so many theories kind of hinge on what went down there.
Yeah, it really has been a focal point for a lot of speculation.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so what else do we have in these files?
So then you have intelligence records, which are fascinating. They detail things like the CIA surveillance of Oswald. There are files on different anti-Castro Cuban groups.
Okay.
And all sorts of information about Cold War interactions.
Wow.
Like between the U.S. and the Soviet Union and Cuba. It really helps to paint a picture of the broader geopolitical scene at the time.
So it really expands beyond just the immediate aftermath of the shooting.
Exactly.
It's like looking at the whole environment.
Exactly. It's about context.
Right, right. Okay, so what else?
Oh, and then there's tons of correspondence. You know, internal memos between government agencies.
Makes sense.
Things like communications from FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover about Oswald's death, you know, at the hands of Jack Ruby.
Yeah.
These kinds of communications really offer a glimpse into the immediate reactions and discussions happening inside these powerful organizations.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I would think that we'd also see the human element in there, right? Like voices of the people who were actually there.
Or absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a wealth of witness testimonies from people on the scene. I mean, we're talking everyone from law enforcement to everyday people who just happen to be there.
Wow.
And witnessed different parts of the event.
Okay.
And then you have all of the physical evidence analysis, ballistics reports, you know, examination of the Zapruder film.
That's right. That incredibly disturbing home movie.
Yeah.
The autopsy records. All aimed at piecing together the events of that day.
I mean, it's mind-blowing to even think about the sheer scale of all this. And for so long, so much of it was either completely secret or like heavily redacted.
Exactly. And that's a really crucial point to understand why all of this speculation persists.
Right.
This history of withheld information and blacked out documents. It really fueled the very conspiracy theories these files were supposed to address, you know, that lack of transparency.
Right.
Well, it created the perfect environment for doubt to take root. To be clear, when I say redacted, that just means that words or whole sections of a document are blacked out before they're released.
Okay, that makes sense. So now that we've got a sense of what's in the files generally,
Yeah.
let's zero in on this latest release.
Yeah.
You mentioned that original 2017 deadline. What has the timeline looked like since then?
Right, so the releases have been happening in stages. Now, before 2017, over 90% of the whole collection was already available publicly.
Although often with those redactions in place.
Right.
But then between 2017 and 2018, during President Trump's administration, thousands of additional documents were released.
Right.
However, even then, some were withheld based on requests from, intelligence agencies who cited potential national security concerns.
Right. Makes sense.
You might remember that in 2017 specifically, something like 2,800 files were released.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
Yeah.
So what about more recently?
Well, under President Biden, from 2022 to 2023, there was another big batch released. This time over 13,000 records.
Wow.
Yeah. And so by the middle of 2023, estimates suggested that around 99% of the entire JFK files collection was already public.
Okay.
Again, with some redactions remaining.
Okay, so we were already really close to full disclosure. What makes this most recent release such a big deal then?
Well, the real game changer was President Trump's Executive Order 14176, which he signed on January 23rd of this year, 2025. This order demanded the full declassification of all remaining JFK files. And what's also really interesting is that it extended to records related to the assassinations of Robert F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. as well.
Wow, okay.
So following that order yesterday, March 18th, we saw the release of over 63,000 pages.
Yeah.
The really important part here is that many of these documents are completely unredacted.
Okay.
Offering like an unprecedented level of detail.
Yeah.
And like we were talking about at the beginning, this includes those newly discovered FBI files.
Right.
About 2,400 records that nobody even knew existed until February. So this is truly new information for everyone to consider.
Okay, so I think the question that's on everyone's mind is this. With all of this never-before-seen material, has a definitive piece of evidence come out? Has something come out to finally prove these long-held conspiracy theories?
That's the big question, isn't it? So historians and experts are poring over all of this new material. And so far, commentators like Frederick Lodgewall and Kevin Boyle have said that the Warren Commission's conclusion that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone hasn't been overturned by anything conclusive in these latest releases.
I know a lot of people feel like these files must have proof of a larger plot.
Yeah.
What about those kind of like intriguing details that have come out over the years? You know, those little clues that seem to suggest something bigger?
You're right that some documents in this huge collection have alluded to things that conspiracy theorists often point to.
Okay.
For example, there's been information about the CIA's knowledge of Oswald before the assassination. And about the really tense Cold War climate with Cuba and the Soviet Union, which provided a plausible setting for some of these theories. There were even examples of government officials speculating amongst themselves about a possible conspiracy.
Interesting.
Right after the assassination.
Wow.
So it's all there in the files.
So there are details that are suggestive, even if nothing concrete has been proven.
Yeah, that's one way to put it.
Okay.
But it's really important for you listening to understand that while these hints and speculations exist in the files, there's still no rock-solid evidence that directly proves a conspiracy. And that's true for all of the releases up to this point, including yesterday's.
Okay.
It's often a matter of interpreting information that is open to different interpretations. Rather than discovering like a clear-cut smoking gun.
So even with these new FBI files from yesterday's release, there's still no smoking gun.
It doesn't seem like it. I mean, it's early days. And people are still analyzing everything. But initial reports highlight interesting details. Like, for example, a KGB assessment of Oswald as a poor shot.
Really?
Yeah. During his time in the Soviet Union.
Interesting.
Yeah. Now, obviously, that's a fascinating detail. It might be surprising to some people.
Yeah.
But these kinds of revelations haven't really changed the main story. As it's understood by most historians, it adds more layers. Maybe it raises new questions about Oswald himself. But it doesn't point definitively toward a bigger conspiracy.
Oh, that's a really important distinction. What's going on right now? Like, what's happening today, March 19th, 2025, with all of this?
Well, as we speak, the National Archives is busy digitizing and uploading all these new records online.
Okay.
In line with President Trump's executive order. They want to make this all available to everyone. Both online and in person at the National Archives facility in College Park, Maryland. It's a huge job, obviously, given how much material there is.
Right. So anyone can literally just go and look at these documents for themselves.
That's right. I mean, pretty much the whole collection is now or will very soon be available for anyone to look at.
That's incredible.
It's worth noting, though, that there's a tiny percentage of files that might still be restricted.
Okay.
Usually because of specific legal reasons. Things like sensitive tax information or, ongoing grand jury proceedings, which obviously have really strict confidentiality protections.
Right.
But pretty much everything else is out in the open now.
Okay, so this is all incredibly fascinating, but why should the average person, listening to this really care? I mean, this is history.
Right.
And for a lot of people, it feels like pretty distant history.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
Yeah.
I mean, the JFK assassination was a major turning point in U.S. history.
Absolutely.
It wasn't just the tragic loss of a president. It shook people's faith in the government and the official explanations.
Yeah.
The fact that decades later, there's still this huge debate and doubt about it.
Right.
Polls consistently show that most Americans don't buy the lone gunman theory.
It's true.
I mean, that really underscores its lasting impact.
It's like this wound in the national psyche that hasn't really healed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's a good way to put it. Plus, the whole story of the JFK files is tied up with these really important historical themes.
Right.
Like the peak of Cold War espionage.
Yeah.
The really complex and often secretive nature of U.S. foreign policy.
Yeah.
Especially towards Cuba.
Right.
And this constant tension between government secrecy and the public's right to know.
Yeah.
So for those of you who are into those bigger topics,
yeah,
the JFK files are like this fascinating, if sometimes frustrating, case study.
Right.
It could lead you down all sorts of rabbit holes.
Okay, so let's bring it all together for our listeners.
Okay.
What are the main takeaways from this deep dive into the latest JFK files release?
The big takeaway is that we just had this massive release of historical records.
Right.
About a hugely important event.
Yeah.
This release gives us even more details, more context, and a clearer look at information that was previously hidden.
Okay.
But as of right now, and despite what a lot of people were hoping for,
right,
no definitive smoking gun evidence has come out to either confirm or deny that lone gunman theory.
Okay, so for those who are hoping for absolute proof of a conspiracy, they might not find it.
Right.
At least not yet.
At least not yet.
But these files are still so valuable.
Well, absolutely. Even without that one earth-shattering revelation.
Right.
These files are such a rich and detailed source of information.
Yeah.
For understanding a really critical period in American history.
Right.
And all the different forces at play. They help us understand the investigations, the intelligence operations, and the way the government worked back then.
Yeah, that's a good point. So here's something to chew on. With almost all of these historical records available now,
right,
what does it say about our understanding of the past when so much information still leads to so much debate and different interpretations? Maybe it's a chance for you to do your own investigation.
Yeah.
Dive into those digital archives and come to your own conclusions.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
I think it's a good point, too.
Yeah.
Okay, folks, that's our deep dive for today. I am so glad you joined us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening.